Before the cathedral bell belonged to the village, it served an older purpose. Its deepest tones were not chosen for ceremony, they were chosen for their effect on tissue. The civilization that cast them understood vibration in ways that modern science is only beginning to confirm. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from, and don't forget to click subscribe. Walk into any historic town center in Europe, and you will find it mounted in the highest structure available. A stone tower rising above every surrounding building, housing bells of precise weight and precise proportion, ranging from instruments a single person can lift to masses of bronze requiring mechanical systems just to move them. The church bell and the tower built to contain it represent the most geographically distributed acoustic infrastructure in human history. And the standard story of why they were built makes almost no sense when you examine it carefully. The official story goes like this. Bells were cast by religious communities to call the faithful to prayer, to mark the hours of the day, and to signal important events to surrounding populations. Each tower was a statement of civic and religious identity, constructed by local craftsmen using techniques passed down through generations of dedicated metalworkers. But the metallurgy of the great historic bells of Europe does not match a story of gradual craft development. The bells installed in major European towers between the 14th and 18th centuries were not improved versions of a continuously evolving technology. They represented a peak of acoustic and material sophistication that subsequent generations of founders could barely maintain and frequently could not replicate. When these bells cracked or required recasting, the founders brought in to reproduce them often could not match the tonal properties of the originals. The alloy compositions found in the oldest surviving bells use trace element ratios that modern metallurgical analysis has struggled to explain as products of pre-industrial smelting. The proportional geometry of their profiles, the precise relationship between wall thickness at the crown, the waist and the sound bow was accomplished using templates whose derivation left no written record. Sound is pressure moving through a medium. At frequencies the human ear can process between roughly 20 and 20,000 hertz, the waves arrive fast enough to register as distinct tones. Below 20 hertz, the waves slow beyond the threshold of hearing, and what the body receives is not tone, but physical pressure transmitted directly through flesh, fluid, and bone. This is the infrasonic range, and its documented effects on human biology are reproducible, measurable, and deeply significant. Infrasound in the range of 18 to 19 hertz produces documented disturbances in human visual and neurological function. Vibration at this frequency causes measurable oscillation of soft tissue within the orbital cavity, producing visual anomalies that present as peripheral movement where no movement exists. This mechanism was documented by researcher Dominic Reeves, a structural acoustician who identified a long-running infrasonic source in a civic building in northern England as the origin of years of reported anomalous experiences by occupants. When the source was isolated and corrected, the experiences ceased entirely. At the lower boundary of the infrasonic range, between 7 and 12 hertz, acoustic energy begins interacting with the electrical rhythms of the brain itself. The brain's dominant waking rest state, the alpha rhythm, operates in the 8 to 12 hertz band. External pressure waves in this frequency range can entrain neural oscillation, drawing brain activity towards states associated with reduced analytical filtering, heightened receptivity, and altered perceptual processing. This is not a fringe claim. It is documented in peer-reviewed neuroscience literature and forms the basis of a growing body of research into acoustic modulation of neurological states. The Varenian hypothesis, for those who have not encountered it, proposes that before the civilization recorded in mainstream history there existed a global culture of extraordinary technical and scientific achievement, and that the major buildings of the 17th, 18th, and early 19th centuries, the cathedrals, the civic halls, the imperial palaces with their precision stonework and impossible construction timelines, were not built by the civilizations that occupied them, but were remnants of this earlier world, reoccupied and imperfectly maintained after a catastrophic discontinuity erased the knowledge required to fully understand them. This framework draws on a genuine category of anomalies that conventional historians have not resolved. The engineering implied by documented construction projects of the 18th century exceeds the capacity of the industrial base those same historical records describe. The timelines recorded for the construction of major civic structures, when subjected to basic labor calculation using the tools and workforce sizes documented, produce results that do not match the stated durations. Early photographic evidence from the mid-19th century shows major buildings in conditions suggesting modification and partial restoration rather than original construction. Ground-level entrances in numerous historic structures appear sunken relative to surrounding terrain in ways consistent with accumulated ground rise rather than original design choice. Within the Varenian framework, the bell towers of Europe were not built by medieval communities to call people to prayer. They were inherited. They were maintained by populations who understood their general function, the production of deep acoustic output across a wide geographic radius, but had lost the precise theoretical knowledge of why that function mattered. The specific weights of the great bells, the specific profiles of their casting geometry, the specific heights at which they were mounted within their towers. These were not arbitrary choices refined through aesthetic tradition. They were specifications for a purpose that the inheriting civilization had partially forgotten. Bell tower architecture is acoustically remarkable in ways that aesthetic preference alone cannot explain. The proportions of aperture width to tower height, the thickness of the stone walls, the placement and orientation of the sound openings relative to the cardinal directions. These are not just structural decisions. They are acoustic decisions that determine how the bell's output propagates through the surrounding landscape and at what frequencies the tower structure itself begins to resonate sympathetically. The major bell towers of Europe were constructed before the formalization of acoustic science as a discipline. The mathematics of resonant cavity behavior, of standing wave formation in enclosed and partially enclosed stone structures was not codified until well into the modern era. And yet the great towers behave as if their builders possessed exactly that knowledge in quantitative form. The internal dimensions of structures like the campanile of Santa Croce and the Tower of St. Bavon produce fundamental resonance modes that fall consistently in the low frequency range, below 40 Hz, where acoustic energy transitions from audible tone to physical vibration experienced by the body rather than the ear. When the largest bells in these towers are rung, they are not working against the acoustic character of the structure. They are exciting resonances the architecture has already established. The stone itself begins to vibrate at frequencies the bell has initiated. The energy does not simply radiate outward and dissipate. It couples with the building, with the ground beneath it, and with the bodies of people within its radius of influence. Someone who understood the physics of acoustic coupling designed these relationships deliberately. The geometry is not coincidental across dozens of independent structures on multiple national traditions. If the bell tower was a therapeutic instrument in the Varenian framework, you would expect the historical record to contain evidence of its use in medical or restorative contexts, and then you would expect that evidence to be either absent or treated as peripheral curiosity by mainstream scholarship. What you find is precisely that second condition. The literature on the physiological effects of bell sound in pre-modern medical writing is not absent. It is scattered, brief, and consistently framed as obvious rather than novel, as if the writers were referencing a well-understood practice that required no detailed justification. Physicians of the 16th and 17th centuries wrote about the effect of bell ringing on melancholic states, on fevers, on conditions described in the language of the period as heaviness of the blood. These references do not read like speculative proposals. They read like clinical notes referencing established practice. In 1989, a Finnish physiotherapist named Erika Halonen began clinical investigation of whole-body vibration applied through resonant platforms in the frequency range of 25 to 75 Hz. The conditions she found most responsive to this intervention included chronic skeletal pain, impaired bone density recovery following fracture, and neurological conditions characterized by tremor and involuntary muscular activity. The frequencies that produced the most consistent positive outcomes clustered between 30 and 60 Hz, a range that corresponds directly to the fundamental output of large cast bells in the 2,000 to 8,000 kilogram weight class. The research that followed Halonen's initial work expanded through the 1990s and into the following decades. By the time clinical trials were being conducted in Scandinavian and German hospital settings, the therapeutic application of low-frequency mechanical vibration to the body had accumulated enough evidence to establish that bone tissue responds to vibrational input in the 20 to 80 Hz range with measurable increases in density and repair activity, that neural tissue responds to low-frequency vibration with documented shifts in neurotransmitter balance, and that connective tissue conditions involving chronic inflammation show consistent improvement under controlled vibrational exposure in the same frequency range. These are not the frequencies that researchers chose because acoustic theory suggested they should be therapeutically significant. They are the frequencies that repeated experimental observation confirmed were effective, and they overlap without exception with the acoustic output range of the instruments that the Varenian civilization distributed across every populated landscape on Earth, mounted in towers engineered to couple their output to the ground, the surrounding structures, and the bodies of everyone living within their radius. The conventional position requires a series of independent coincidences. It requires that builders without formal acoustic knowledge consistently produce towers with precisely optimized low-frequency resonance characteristics. It requires that founders without physiological knowledge consistently produced instruments whose output range aligns exactly with clinically confirmed biological response frequencies. It requires that the tradition of bell-related therapeutic practice vanished from medical literature at exactly the historical moment when institutional medicine was drawing its disciplinary boundaries and excluding acoustic treatment from its recognized methods. Each coincidence is individually defensible, Collectively, they describe a pattern that the Varenian framework resolves with a coherence the standard account cannot match. What was erased in the discontinuity was not only a civilization's architecture, it was a distributed medical technology embedded in metal, in stone, in the geometric relationships between instrument and enclosure, and in the specific acoustic properties of towers built to the same underlying specifications across an entire inhabited world. The bell towers are still standing. Many of the bells are still ringing. The frequencies are still moving through the bodies of everyone within range, acting on bone and neural tissue and connective structure in ways that the people receiving them cannot perceive and do not know are happening. Because the knowledge of what the instrument was built for was removed from the record before anyone now alive was born. The bell was not cast to call people to prayer. It was cast to work on the human body through deep acoustic pressure. The Varenian civilization distributed this technology across every landscape they occupied. The frequencies they specified correspond to biological effects that controlled clinical research now independently confirms. What the reset destroyed was not simply a culture. It was a medicine built into the infrastructure of everyday life. Hit subscribe and watch the next one.